In, in 1994, the year of the meeting with Brusher and Bodwell, Maurice R. Hank Greenberg was 69 years old and had been the chief executive of AEH for a remarkable 26 years. Fairfax even more remarkable, despite his age and the length of the head tenure. He showed no signs of slowing down. He had no succession plan and zero interest in creating one. Two of his sons had become high-ranking executives in AEH and were often mentioned as potential successors, but eventually left to run other insurance companies when they realized that Greenberg was never going to be the case on to the kingdom. He was dominant, brilliant, and irascible, short-tempered, controlling, obsessive, and by far the most successful insurance executive of his era, and perhaps any era, since 1968, when ACH founder C.B. Starr catapulted him over to higher-ranking executive to by the CEO. He had transformed the Star Company, which had been founded in Shanghai nearly 50 years earlier, from a quirky privately held firm into the largest insurance company in the world. It had a stock price that outpaced in the competitors, a reputation for trading where others wouldn't, and earnings growth so steady, topping $2 billion a year by the mid-1990 years. That was the envy of the industry. EJ wasn't just Greenberg Company, it was his creation, his baby, his sun, and his moon, and his star. People sometimes joked at the planet to run around of the grapes. The son of taxi driver from the Bronx, Greenberg was up by his bootstraps in the 20th century. New York could be. He ran away from home at 17 to fight in World War II. Took part in the Normandy invasion. Attended the University of Miami and New York Law School, but started to fight again in Korea, and finally wound up in the insurance industry. When they complained about the man interviewing him for a job, to the man boss in 1960 years, C.B. started Greenberg to ACH 2 years later. He put in shares of ACH's struggling U.S. operation, which he turned into a roaring success. 6 years later, we start just months from death and anointed Greenberg and his successor. Greenberg's passion for AEH went way beyond the norm and vowed to any company executive who didn't share the passion. He took nothing on calling executives at 3 a.m. to discuss business, behavior for which he made no apologize. He would have weekly meetings with the Casely Jonans, the main point on which sometimes seemed to be a gift Greenberg to the opportunity to berate them in front of their peers. He could unmerciful recalls a long time. A.H. Han, Fortune magazine, in one of the many A.H. profiles it has published over the years, told of a time an executive being assailed by Greenberg couldn't take it anymore. You know, he finally conceded. You're right, Greenberg shot back. I don't need you to tell me I am right. Indeed, Greenberg felt sure he had a better understanding on the different divisions than the men running those divisions did. After all, It was Greenberg who had come up with the brainstorm, pushed it into the new business, and engineered the mergers that had turned AEH into an insurance behemoth. AEH operated three insurance subsidiaries in countries, and Greenberg had his finger on the pulse on every last 1/10 or so, unless it seemed. A lot of the strategy was Ronald Hanks' hit, size of former AH executives. He had most of the ideas about how to run business, and he fully expected his executives to carry out to those ideas, no question asked. One famous story involving an Iranian-American executive, Q.C. Chavani, who Greenberg sent to Iran in the early 1970 years because Chavani knew some family members on the Shah of Iran. Greenberg assigned him the tax and convincing the Shah to allow AEH to operate inside the country, something no foreign insurance company was allowed to do. Once in Tehran, Chavani discovered that the only way AEH could get into Iran was if the parliament passed a law impeding it. He turned to the United States and told Greenberg that the change and the happening were remote. "If I were you, I'd get job," he said, according to Fortune. "I didn't ask you what was necessary to do this," replied Greenberg. "I just asked you to get it done. He did, among other things." Chavani married to the Shah Socialist secretary, having at some point gotten divorced from the American wife. Sure enough, the law was passed in 1975 years, and AEH ran a profitable business and is in Iran until the Iranian Revolution 4 years later. To put it another way, Greenberg didn't so much manage his executive team as control them. Running AEH as not as some benevolent dictatorship. One way he did was by establishing for the top. AEH was one of the most generous, yet most onerous, bonus plans ever devised. Each year, the 302 executives were granted units of the participation in a company called Star International Company, or SICO, which was based in Panama, was the largest shareholder. It is a value rose as AEH share rose. Greenberg, in turn, was SICO's biggest shareholder, with 25% of the company, and SICO boards were made up almost entirely on the executive. Here, however, was the catch. You couldn't get your hands on your accumulated SICO bonus until you turned 65. If you were still with AEH, HEG, when you turned 65, you could way away with the tens of millions of dollars. But if you left the day before your 65th birthday, you got nothing. Greenberg, of course, was the one who decided how many units of participation you got. There was, however, one piece of the ICJ that Greenberg didn't control, and was known as ICJ's financial products. Everyone called it. It was the part of the company in the database business, headquartered in Walton, Connecticut, and London. It was run by Howard Sossin, who was every bit the control freak that Greenberg was, and who made it plain that expected Greenberg to stay out of his playpen. Even though the division was making plenty of profits, this was hardly a situation that could continue indefinitely, and it didn't eventually Sosin faltered, at which point Greenberg paused. That is what Greenberg was referring to when he spoke to Boucher and Bowell. He had finally managed to put FP under his thumb. Starting a derivatives business at the ACJ was one of the very few money-making ideas that had not sprung, fully formed from Hank Greenberg's fertile mind. This also explains why he didn't control it at the start. Although his insurance company ACJ was in the risk business, it did not necessarily follow the insurance company when diving into derivatives. Insurance companies were generally conservative institutions if they used derivatives at all. It was a customer of a big bank like J.P. Morgan, trying to hedge an interest rate and the currency risk. Under Weinberg had built a reputation for its willingness to take an unusual one-of-a-kind risk. AEJ wrote kidnapping insurance, it insured fatalities, and even wrote insurance on the first ostrich farm in Texas. Weinberg used to boast the AEJ's balance sheet was so big that it could take on risk other companies. But derivatives, Weinberg hadn't really thought, and a potential new line of business. It was Sosin who brought the idea to Weinberg. Sosin was the prototypical modern Wall Streeter and native of Salt Lake City. He had gotten a PhD from Stanford. Taught finance at Columbia Business School and put in the still in the Paul laboratories before joining Drexel Burnham in the early 1918 years. He was, in other words, a quant. Drexel in Tuesday was best known for his most infamous executive, Michael Milken, the man who popularized it. Jones, bonds, and built a huge business around them. Sosin wasn't interested in junk bonds. Instead, like any quants, he gravitated toward a complex derivatives, becoming one of the pioneers in developing even more complicated form of swaps. The problem for Sosin was that, as threatened, derivatives were never going to replace junk bonds and the firm's bread and butter. Drexel also didn't have a particularly good credit rating, which meant its borrowing costs were higher than in competitors. This made it difficult to run a profitable derivatives desk. Sosin had big ideas about doing swaps, deals that no one had ever done before, with duration of fitting out 20, or even 30 years, instead of the much shorter duration that were never the norm. He needed to find a different corporate parent to make that happen. By the fall in 1986, Sosin and several Drexel College were searching for a company that could. Back then, they were particularly interested in companies with lots of HEPs and capital and an AAA credit rating. This as now, there were fewer than a dozen companies with AAA ratings. Warren Buffett's conglomerated Berkshire Hathaway and General Electric. but had AAA rating, so did AEJs, a fact in which Greenberg took immense pride and which the heedlessly word. Sussing was introduced to Greenberg through former Connecticut Senator Abraham Rybakov. Greenberg was greatly enamored with Sussing, but because this was outside his area of expertise, he took a backseat in the negotiation that ensued. What Sussing wanted was complete autonomy, and of course coming from Wall Street, a piece of whatever profits he generated for HIG, and that's what he got. The contract he signed with AJ in January 1987 called for the formation of a joint venture, with AJ owning 18% and Sussing 20%. Sussing and his team got to the command to 38% of FP profits, which were designed incentive compensation. Sussing in turn will have sole discretion in distributing his share on the pie to his staff. In truth, part of the reason Greenberg was willing to cut such a sweet deal was that he didn't really comprehend just how profitable FP was going to be besides, and someone who has there who later grew up, had liked getting married and never took about getting divorced. Almost immediately, the new joint venture was taking a larger risk than most other swap dealers. Without question, the key of the business was the AAA rating and the enormous balance sheet of the parent company, which not only gave FP cost advantage, but made it very desirable counterparty. Nobody worried that the HCJ would have problems if it lost money in derivatives trade. It was also extremely well run. Sussing kept close tapes and FP Rex profile, which is true, allowing him to take larger risks and generate larger profits. Under Sussing, FP ended specialty in swaps that went out as far as 30 years, controlling the risks by using a technique called dynamic hedging, which involved constantly recalibrating and rehiding. We haven't done with FP willingness to do long-dated deals or allow into share higher fees than its competitors. In its first 6 months, FP generated $16 million. Greenberg was amazed. There are the other not things people remember about the early years at FP. One was the controlling as Sussing was. The environment he created was far more collaborative than other HEA's business. Greenberg liked people to say how high when he said jump. Sussing wanted people who were willing to question this, and he created a culture where people could spread skepticism without fear of being reprimanded. Sussing also instilled in his troop a sense that they were an elite vanguard, battling bigger and more powerful forces. To some degree, they were. So it had to be more creative. Marketers and FP would come up with some exciting new product, sell it to clients, and the ride is hard. Stayed cool for 2 or 3 years. Eventually took the big boys and the Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan will come out with their own version of the FP product, at which point the profit margin will be squeezed and FP will move on to something even more exotic, such as representative for pushing the edge on the derivative envelope. Goes the Wall Street Journal to label him the Dr. Strangelove on derivatives. The other thing fast traders noticed was that Hank Greenberg was simply not part of their life elsewhere in the company. Greenberg had no competition about calling a mid-level manager in some division somewhere to find an answer to questions he had. That never happened on FP. The special computer system doesn't have well for FP was not shared with the rest of EAs. On the contrary, he had a clause in his contract stipulating that if he ever left the company, he would take the whole system with him. Anytime Greenberg did anything that wasn't considered middling, he would err. In 1919 for instance, Drexel employment and Greenberg quickly snatched up a handful of Drexel traders, with the idea of having them create a new currency trading operation for AEH. When they told Sossin what he had done, Sossin replied that the under terms and their joint venture. Greenberg responded by sending Sossin a letter informing him that AEH is planning to terminate his joint venture agreement. Sossin reacted by undertaking a search for another AAA company to back him, knowing that he had the contractual right to take his computer system with him. Greenberg heard through the rubber pin once Sossin was dying. He blinked. Within 2 months, he patched things up Sossin